So I usually start these things off with a silly joke or a dedication to some absurd thing to kind of loosen things up before the story starts, but this time, I just wanted to say thanks for picking this show. Out of all the great stuff out there that you could possibly have chosen, thanks for listening to this one. Seriously, thank you. So, without further ado, let's get this mystery started, shall we? Okay, fine. I'd like to dedicate this episode to words that are super hard to say, such as February, as in, her birthday's in February this year. Specific, as in, I specifically asked you to book a hotel on the Pacific Ocean. Spaghetti, as in, would you like some fresh ground pepper with your paschetti, sir? But above all these, perhaps the most difficult words to say are, dude, I love you, but your breath smells like butt. There. Happy? Cool. Way cool. Okay, now we can get this mystery started. Welcome to Several Stories High, an eclectic, electric anthology of fiction, fact, and everything in between. I'm your host, Nathaniel David Knox. Shall we begin? Why would someone steal 7 old used school buses from the same junkyard, only to abandon them a few hundred feet away from their spots inside the yard, even though the gate was wide open? Okay, maybe this wasn't the first question to come to your mind when you woke up this morning, but it was for Miss Monette. The year was 2002, and Monette Bridgeforth was sipping coffee at 5:30 a.m. inside her Glimmer Park, Wexler City apartment. She was on a week's vacation from her job at Watts, Wexler Authority over Transit Systems, the city's busy public transportation network. Of course, Miss Monette had plenty of other better things to worry about besides recent incidents involving old school buses that morning, like taking care of all the wedding preparations for her and Gilly, her man-to-be who was snoring on the couch. He was a sound engineer and a producer for a former loan shark gone legit who owned a little recording studio, so needless to say, Gilly's hours were usually all over the place. But she loved him, and with her son Manny out of the house and away at a culinary art school in Chicago, she loved the company too. Monette and Gilly met a couple years prior, when Gilly first rode the bus she was driving. Sounds quirky, I know, but the two of them really hit it off that fateful day Gilly got on. One look at her red, side-parted micro-twist braids, sunglasses, and gold-tooth accented smile, and Gilly was, as they say, smitten. He never wanted to get off that bus again. Both were divorced and in their later years, so the two thought their chances of love and happiness were behind them. But not so fast. All this to say is that after many more bus rides, moonlit dinners, jazz clubs, late-night phone calls, and walks along just about every inch of the Jennings riverfront in Wexler, Monette and Gilly were in love, and they were to be married in just a few weeks. They'd even spent the better part of a year and a half saving up $14,000 together for their new life on the horizon, including the actual wedding ceremony, but also to pay for the plane tickets and hotel rooms for all their collective kids and relatives and longtime friends scattered across the country to come see them tie the knot. The rest of the money they saved was for a down payment on a house in a beautiful neighborhood in North Wexler called Juniper Grove. But somehow, above all these more pressing matters that still needed to be attended to and decided for the wedding, flower selection being one of them, the question of the old school bus incident had latched onto Monette and simply wouldn't let go. Was it just because she was a bus driver herself, and her mind was simply making some kind of early morning weird association? She'd first heard about the incident from a cousin of hers, Melvin, who made water jug deliveries to the old school bus junkyard once every couple weeks. Somehow, for some strange reason, somebody snuck into the old fenced-in dirt yard of Big Ed's junkyard in the dead of night by cutting the lock on the front gate with bolt cutters. Then they snatched the bus keys and one by one drove 7 of the old 70s and 80s era school buses away from their spots in the long rows of buses. But instead of driving them out the gate and getting away, they just left them all parked willy-nilly near the edge of the razor wire fence inside the yard. Apparently, the suspect or suspects were in the middle of stealing an 8th bus when the owner himself, Big Ed Daniels, caught them in the act when he came to open up early in the morning, scaring the would-be thief or thieves away. The Old Jupiter Sun was the only paper in Wexler County that even ran a story on the event. And even Big Ed Daniels himself was quoted as saying he wasn't too much rattled by it all, tell you the truth. Probably just a bored kid in a ski mask. School's out after all. Monette sipped on her coffee, sunglasses on, yes, even indoors, and read the article at her breakfast table. Staring at the grainy black and white photo of Big Ed by an old numbered school bus, Monette's mind moved to her older sister, Valencia. She taught Monette to read all those years ago as a kid by taking the copies of the Old Jupiter Sun after their father was done with them. She helped Monette read little things here and there at first until she got the hang of it. Ball game scores, wedding announcements, want ads, things like that. Miss you so much it hurts, Monette thought, coffee steam warming her face and blurring her teary eyes beneath her shades. You know how even the smallest details get etched into your mind when something life-altering happens to you? Well, that's what happened to Monette when her sister passed away in the 70s. Monette could still see that morning's edition of the Old Jupiter Sun the day it happened. Front page articles read, Wexler Railers beat Philadelphia Phillies 6-4. Local heiress loses fortune in home invasion. And finally, Wexler Longshoremen's Union Local 102 threatens second strike. Miss Monette by no means had a photographic memory, except for that paper. She could practically recite every line from each article, and the whole paper itself for that matter. It's the little things you remember when the big ones fall apart. Back in reality at her breakfast table, Monette shook off the sadness, lest it consume her for good. Looking back down at the article on the school bus break-in, she knew in her gut that the incident, however random or minor it may seem to everybody else, was more than just some bored kid or kids taking out-of-circulation school bus joyrides. How'd she know this, you might ask? Call it a hunch. Something Valencia had taught her as a child to never ignore. Monette woke Gilly up by dropping the needle on one of his favorite records by the Impressions, Full Blast. And after he cursed a bit and rubbed the sleep from his eyes, Monette told Gilly to cancel his plans for the day. And this was no small feat for a busy Friday of recording sessions, mind you. But Gilly listened to that slight tinge in her voice, a combination of serious, curious, and slightly playful, and then somehow back to serious again. They hit the road in Gilly's old Buick. Gilly drove so Monette could think on the way over to the junkyard. What a weird thing to do, she thought, the Wexler County wind in her hair. Why are you gonna steal some old buses and not even drive them out of the place? But Miss Monette was no stranger to mystery. Ever since she could remember, she knew the world seemed to be so generous with questions and so greedy with answers. Her own little question marks started sprouting up when she was a young girl, way before the family even moved to Wexler, back in Hoboken, New Jersey. She'd stay up in bed, pestering Valencia with every question under the sun that had long since set for the night. She smiled in the Buick, remembering one of these such late-night sister exchanges in vivid detail. How do you know what all the flowers smell like? A 10-year-old Monette asked her sister all those years ago. Smell them, I guess, Valencia moaned, trying to get some sleep for school the next day. But what about the ones you haven't found yet? In other places and stuff? Monette continued. Monette then proceeded to tell her sleepy older sister about a flower she'd been smelling all the time, as she said. A flower she didn't have a name for. She smelled it on the playground at school, on the walk to and from church, even out on the fire escape of their third-story apartment above the delicatessen. I mean, I think it's a flower. Gotta be, right? Sure smells like one. Real pretty. Makes me feel not so sad. Yeah, probably, said Valencia, yawning. Probably some kind of flower. Now go to sleep, baby girl. But how do I know if it's really a flower if I don't know what all the flowers smell like? Read about them, I guess. How can I read what a smell is? Monette said, her voice getting higher pitched with curiosity. Can a book do that? Valencia sighed and squinted through the darkness and said, I got a hunch you had coffee earlier, even though Mama said not to before she went to work. What's a hunch? Said little Monette, dodging the accusation. It's like a feeling you get about something, but in your gut and in your heart. You heard Mama say she's got a hunch, right? Has she ever been wrong when she says that? Don't think so. Never ignore a hunch, Valencia said, rolling over. I think I got a hunch that I'm gonna have a lot more hunches, Monette whispered. Take that back, Valencia said. Ignore it just for tonight so I can get some... Valencia fell asleep that night all those years ago, but as Monette recalled the memory with bittersweet fondness on the way to the junkyard, the image of her older sister falling asleep in the darkness was more of a symbol of her passing than anything else now. Valencia Bridgeforth died of a rare bleeding in the brain, an occurrence in which less than 1% of people die from, but Valencia was one of them. She'd barely seen her 30s when she passed. Why? I mean, why anyone? But especially why Valencia? Like I said before, Monette was no stranger to mystery. So this matter of stolen buses was mere child's play by comparison. Maybe that's why she was so confident when they exited the Buick and approached Big Ed's junkyard. This seemed like a puzzle she could actually solve, if nothing else. Monette walked through the open gate, hunch first, and she noticed the sign on the gate that said, Big Ed's, established 1982. A burly fellow emerged from a shaded shack that had a shotgun leaning next to the door and a chained Rottweiler that barked occasionally as the two approached. But surprisingly, Big Ed, sweat and smudge on his aging face, was warm once Monette said Melvin was her cousin. A cousin of Melvin is all right in my book, Ed said. Guess the man loved his water jug deliveries or something. Not hard to fathom in that summer heat. Under the fib that Monette and Gilly were merely fans of all things 70s and 80s era, not a complete lie, mind you, Big Ed said Monette and Gilly were free to look around and to holler if they needed anything before going back into his shack. Gilly was patient as Monette strolled the 5 aisles of old parked yellow school buses, all in tight rows of 6. But she only knew one of the 7 bus numbers stolen because it was in the photo from the paper, which she had cut out and put in her pocket. But now all the buses were put back. The dirt yard was fenced in and overlooked the tranquil shores of Lake Van Buren. Pretty a sight as it was, the place was still rather cramped, so the two held hands and stayed close. Not like they needed a reason, of course. Now Miss Monette was scanning and noticing. She found the actual bus from the picture in the lineup. She could start there. She circled the bus quietly, still scanning, still noticing. Gilly waiting patiently, humming Motown melodies to himself. And while Miss Monette is busy looking for clues, I'd like to invite you to join in on the mystery. No, really, this is me now, Nathaniel, narrator here. I'm asking you, the listener, what do you think? Why in the world would someone break into an old school bus junkyard, steal a series of buses, only to leave them scattered about at the fence inside the yard when the gate was wide open? Any theories? Was it just a bored kid or kids? Maybe 70s era nostalgia enthusiasts? Were they going to be taken to be a part of some super slow anticlimactic race or something? Were they stolen for spare parts? Were old buses even worth stealing? Again, what do you think? Any theories? Any hunches? Minutes of surveying passed, and as far as Miss Monette could tell, this particular bus was about as yellow and unremarkable as any other. The summer breeze brushed through the yard. She caught that smell, or maybe it caught her. That mysterious flower from childhood she didn't have a name for. Gilly didn't even know about that tidbit, Not yet, at least. Sweet smell in her soul now, she contemplated. What was she missing? Was she overthinking it? Underthinking it? Does this mystery even matter? If there's one thing she learned from all her years of driving buses for Watts, it's that people rarely do anything for no reason at all. And this sure was an oddly specific thing to do for no reason. She looked at the newspaper clipping of the bus. Then the breeze knocked it from her grasp and it zipped down beneath the actual bus itself, flailing with the wind into a crevice between the tire and the dirt. She knelt down to grab the paper. Then she noticed something. The dirt. It didn't feel right. It wasn't firm and ancient. It felt fresh and loose. Miss Monette knew the difference all too well. She felt the dirt at Valencia's grave turn from fresh soil to firm earth every day for the first year after she passed, all those years ago. She visited every single day, in the sun and sleet, rain from above and from her eyes. Still kneeling at the bus, Monette's hunch was red hot now. Someone had been digging the night of the incident. Digging for something worth moving 7 buses or more to get to. She walked all throughout the yard, checking beneath each bus. 6 other buses had fresh, loosely packed dirt beneath them. The rest all had solid, untouched soil beneath. This has nothing to do with old school buses, Miss Monette thought. They're just in the way with whatever's buried in this yard. Big Ed wouldn't have noticed this when he put the buses back in their spots in the dark pre-dawn. Monette's heart was pounding now. What could be buried here? Baby, she said to Gilly quickly but affectionately. Yes, dear, he said, knowing he was about to be asked to do something. Asked to use Big Ed's phone. How come, dear? Ask Charlie if any big-timers have gotten out of prison recently. Ask him if any are back in Wexler. I got a hunch. Gilly, not knowing the full details, simply nodded and walked away. And make sure you talk real quiet on the phone, finished Monette. Charlie was Charlie Van Winkle, the former loan shark who owned the studio Gilly worked at. Decent fella, given his former underworld employment. If anybody would know about a heavy hitter coming back to town, it'd be Charlie. Former loan shark or not, he always kept his ear to the streets. And since Gilly never broke a law in his life, Miss Monette knew that Mr. Van Winkle was the key to this info, and fast. In the heat of the moment, Miss Monette fanned herself and smiled at Gilly's willingness to help her. She loved him for that, and many other things too. She couldn't wait to marry the man. But until that beautiful day, she had a mystery to solve. When Gilly returned, he told her that Charlie only heard of one guy of note who was recently out of the can on parole, as he put it. His name was Samuel Cinnamon Sam Foster. Cinnamon Sam was a notorious Wexler B&E man who led a murderous ring of robbers in the 1970s dubbed the Wexler Wild Bunch. It's supposed that he got his nickname because the man always smelled like cinnamon on account of his sweet-smelling homemade cologne. Apparently this was a huge hit with the ladies, or at least he thought so in his warped mind. Gilly said he got arrested in the mid-70s on burglary, assault, and home invasion charges, and that he just so happened to get out on parole from his 30-year bid a few days ago. Cinnamon Sam. Where had Monette heard that before? Had she heard it? Or read it? The Old Jupiter's Son. Yes, that's it. The same edition that she knew by heart from the day her sister passed all those years ago. The article. The one titled Local Heiress Loses Fortune in Home Invasion. Miss Monette's eyes were darting all over from behind her shades in that hot, breezy yard now. The article was referring to the robbery of Miss Elena Foxhall, heiress to the late C.T. Foxhall's vast railroad fortune. An avid philanthropist and activist in her day, Miss Elena was beloved by all in Wexler, and there was a public outrage at the brutal and brazen break-in and theft of some $1.1 million in cash from her home's vault. Much money of which was earmarked for a half a dozen local and national charities, mind you. The money was never recovered, and Miss Elena Foxhall passed away in 1993 and donated her home to the city's Historic Preservation Society, and she left the remaining portion of her fortune to those same assorted charities and nonprofits. Monette could see the old inked words in her mind clear as day. The suspect, Samuel Cinnamon Sam Foster, was apprehended only 2 days after the robbery, when, after a county-wide manhunt, he was found emerging from a patch of woods near Lake Van Buren, carrying a shovel, which he swung at officers before being violently restrained and arrested. Who else on earth could it be? She thought, wiping the sweat and gnats from her face. Miss Monette quickly whispered the dots to Gilly, connecting them like a switchboard operator in a lightning storm. These were the facts. With the police hot on his trail, Cinnamon Sam was found just 2 days after the Foxhall robbery, coming out of the woods with a shovel near Lake Van Buren. He must have known he'd be caught at any moment, so rather than lose all that money, he buried it. If he could survive the long prison sentence that was surely coming his way, at least he'd have all that money buried back in those woods somewhere only he knew the location of. While Cinnamon Sam was in jail, Big Ed must have cleared out the spot to build his junkyard, completely oblivious that he set up shop on top of buried treasure, hence the established in 1982 sign, several years after Cinnamon's arrest. That settled it. Cinnamon Sam was back for his score. But why should he get it? Thought Miss Monette. After all, the man broke into an elderly widow's home, knocked her unconscious with a blackjack, and took over $1 million in cash meant for charity. That money would be better off in anybody's hands than his now, right? Do you trust me? Miss Monette quickly asked Gilly. He looked puzzled. She took off her shades, a rare occurrence, and said, Baby, I'm serious. Do you trust me? Gilly cocked his head curiously and finally said, With all my heart. They kissed, and in a flash they were back at the shack, talking to Big Ed, who was gulping from a hefty metal mug of water, and he nearly spit it all out when he heard Miss Monette's question. Say what? He said. Miss Monette repeated herself, asking again if they could rent out the junkyard for their engagement photos in complete privacy, on account of the lake view. Just her, Gilly, and a photographer. She had to keep from laughing herself on account of Gilly's frown and poorly hidden look of bewilderment. Truth was, they already shot their engagement photos, and of course there's no way in hell they'd seriously ask for such an odd thing. Bus junkyard engagement photos? Sounds like an indie band. But Miss Monette knew they needed a way to get in there and dig up beneath the other buses without Big Ed seeing them. But Big Ed shot them down quickly, saying this wasn't the place for that sort of thing. Nope, no way, he said, as much as he liked the two of them. No. There was a gulp from Miss Monette before she spoke again, saying, We'll pay you $14,000, cash money, tomorrow morning. She said, holding Gilly's hand lest he keel over from shock. Trust me, she mouthed as Big Ed coughed over his water again, looking down to compose himself. You're serious, Big Ed said. Yes. The big man frowned and looked towards the lake. Then he spoke. All right, 6 a.m., bright and early. I want to catch the catfish special at O'Leary's before it's all gone. 14 grand, and the man's top priority was a morning plate of catfish. More power to you, Big Ed. The three shook hands and parted ways. The race was on. $1.1 million in cash. That's a wedding, a house in Juniper Grove big enough to host all their family and friends, and then some. But what if Cinnamon Sam made another crack at it before they did? That reminded Miss Monette of one of the last loose ends to tie up. A pen, a scrap of paper, and one well-placed phone call to a friend who rode her bus is all she would need. 6 a.m. the next morning. In the yard stood Miss Monette and Gilly, both dressed to the nines in wedding wear and ringed fingers, plus cousin Melvin, dress slacks, white-collared shirt, and camera around his neck to complete the ruse. Big Ed closed the gate behind him, though not locking it, and put a makeshift sign that read, Closed for the day, private event. And it's probably the only time in recorded history that a junkyard would have such a sign. Giggling, giddy, a manila envelope of cash in hand, Big Ed said he'd be back at 6 p.m., so they needed to be done with everything by then. But for 14 large, they could spend all the 13 hours until then taking pictures in the yard and by the lake and wherever else for all he cared. With catfish on his mind, he drove away, disappearing into the dawn. As soon as the coast was clear, everyone leapt into action. Miss Monette and Gilly quickly ran to the Buick, which was parked inside the yard. Monette swapped her heels for tennis shoes, and Gilly grabbed 2 shovels from the trunk. Cousin Melvin gave Gilly back his camera, opened the gate, and ran to his own car to change back into his water delivery uniform before hitting the road to go to work. Monette and Gilly thanked him for the help and promised to give him a handsome reward when they found the money. That's right, not if, when. They found the bus keys in the shack and corresponding tags to each bus number, and it was time to dig. Hours upon hours of hot, sweaty toil passed. They went row by row, bus by bus, digging and digging, skipping the ones that already had the fresh soil, of course, all the while looking over their shoulders to make sure nobody was driving up or snooping. Miss Monette saw the glint of Gilly's .38 snub-nosed revolver in his back waistline. He carried it from his days as a trucker in St. Louis, and he still carried it upon request of his boss, Charlie, for obvious reasons. Not thrilled with the idea by any means, Miss Monette prayed to God that he wouldn't have to use it, and so did he. All the more reason to move quick. They kept going. Start the bus. Move the bus. Dig like hell. Find nothing. Refill the hole. Put the bus back. And on to the next. They cleared 3 of the 5 rows of buses by late lunchtime, but there was no time to eat, only to drink from the water jug between digs. Blisters grew and ruptured. Sweat continued to pour, and still no sign of anything close to money in the dirt. It seemed like Miss Monette might have sweated out some of her confidence, too. Had she been wrong? Was she too cocky with her hunch on this one? She convinced Gilly to give away all their savings. And what if she was wrong after all? What if she connected dots that didn't need connecting? The breeze was back, a cool gift from the lake. There it was as they filled another empty rectangular hole. That smell, that pretty, mysterious, flower-like smell. Monette thought of Valencia. "Miss you so much it hurts," she said to herself. Gilly said he needed a break, panting heavily and pouring water over his face. They had just moved away the last bus that had undug dirt beneath it. "Gotta be here, right?" Miss Monette thought wearily. "Last one." She dug and dug and dug. Had they the money and time to prepare, maybe they would have rented a bulldozer, but hindsight's 20/20, right? Monette was waist deep in the 3rd rectangular pit she dug where the last bus had been, and nothing to show for it. Beyond tired, Gilly said he needed to go in and get some water from the shack. Monette nodded and said she'd like some too as she sat in the pit. The cool shade was a welcome comfort. She closed her eyes, leaning her head against the dirt wall of the shaded pit in what felt like the inevitable letdown of defeat. And she winced. The back of her head hit something jagged, something metallic. She started digging against the side of the pit, her nails bleeding. Soon something like an enormous metal strongbox fell into the pit with a loud thunk and a little deluge of dirt. She popped it open. Cash. Beautiful, preserved cash wrapped in plastic inside the padded case. The cases must have been supremely waterproof for the bills to last this long. Someone did their homework. She cried, she was so happy. All the stuff they could do with this money. The wedding, done. The house, done. Family, friends, everybody could stay with them. Done. No more stressing over paychecks and rent and all that nonsense. It'd buy them time to enjoy the rest of the years she and Gilly would have together. Yes! It was time to fill the hole, move the bus back, and get the hell out of there. But she paused. It was okay to take the money, right? After all, Miss Elena had passed away years back. But the conflict in her gut was beyond uncomfortable. Was it right to take the money? Should she turn it into her estate or something? Would it even be put to good use? What should they do with the money? Another summer breeze visited. It even made its way into the pit. There was a sweet smell in the air again. Was sweet the right word? Monette talked behind her line of sight to the shadow, happy she at least found the money. Gilly, I found it, baby. The smell grew stronger. It smelled like cinnamon. A deep, curt, unfamiliar voice commanded Monette to get out of the hole with the huge metal strongbox. Terrified, she did. A lanky man in brown corduroy and a black ski mask snatched it from her, a black pistol pointed at her with his other hand. She could see Sam's blue eyes even with the mask. To him, he was staring at a mere witness. A witness standing in front of a freshly dug grave. It was too perfect. Without so much as a Hollywood-esque utterance, Cinnamon Sam aimed at Monette's head. She prayed like never before, and soon she smelled the real sweet smell again, hoping that God and Valencia were both at the place it was coming from, ready to welcome her. But she couldn't bear the thought of life without her son, Manny, and not without... Gilly shouted for Sam to drop his gun. Relieved and terrified, Monette watched as Gilly and Cinnamon Sam aimed at each other, each screaming for the other to drop the gun. The shouts got louder. The Rottweiler barked in the distance. Monette joined in, screaming for Sam to drop the gun and the briefcase. "Drop it!" Cinnamon Sam snapped. "You drop it," she said. "You know how many years I rotted away so I could get this? It's mine!" Sam screamed, swiveling his aim between Gilly and Monette. "You stole it!" yelled Monette. "Oh yeah, I suppose you two are about to turn it in like good citizens? Now drop the gun and I'll be on my way." "You were just about to shoot me!" Miss Monette cried. Gilly held firm, eyes blurring from sweat. His trembling finger was on the trigger. Any second might be a wrong move. Cinnamon Sam looked jumpy and trigger-happy too. All three turned around to see Big Ed. Shotgun snapping down from the sky and now aiming at all three of them in quick spasms. Ed said he came back early on account of him forgetting to feed the dog. He didn't look too happy at the scene that he came back to. More arguing ensued. Shouts grew again. The four of them, three of them which had guns pointing every which way, were now in the middle of a school bus junkyard standoff. Is this really worth it? Miss Monette thought, terrified. For it all to end here? Now? Like this? Monette made eyes with Gilly and spoke with him. Gilly nodded, and as calm and quiet as a church mouse, he lowered his pistol and put it in his back waistline. Big Ed, quicker than many would have given him credit for, used the distraction to smack Cinnamon Sam across the forehead, sending him to the ground, disarmed. "Big Ed, I'm sorry," Monette said. "We're so sorry for lying to you. I don't quite know what to do here, but I'm really not trying to lose my life over this." Gilly agreed, lifting his hands to Big Ed's aim. "Look, man," said Gilly. "I just want her. Nothing else. Just want her." Gilly grabbed Monette's hand. Big Ed seemed infinitely more angered at the dazed, ski mask-wearing man on the ground than at Monette and Gilly now. "Get out of here," Ed said. "Both of you. If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have gotten all that extra catfish. Guess we're even now." Not waiting to see if he was kidding or not, the two, hand in hand, ran back to the Buick. But Monette forgot something. A little slip of paper in her pocket. She ran back to Big Ed, who looked like his patience was getting mighty thin. She handed the slip of paper to him. She told him it was the phone number of Sam's parole officer. The masked man cursed from the ground. Miss Monette had called a friend who rode her bus, who just so happened to be an administrative assistant for the WPD. Big Ed put the paper in his pocket, grabbed the strongbox with one hand, and ordered Sam up, leading him to the shack and chaining him awfully close to that Rottweiler. As he dialed the phone, Big Ed nodded to Miss Monette one last time. Days later, Miss Monette found herself right back where she started, only with 4 days less of vacation time and $14,000 shorter on savings. The guilt was still mighty powerful. She sipped coffee to the snores of Gilly on the couch. She still couldn't wait to marry him, broke or not. especially when talking the past night about what went on. Gilly had told her that he still loved her and still trusted her. And Monette read in the old Jupiter Sun that a certain notorious criminal had been put back into prison due to a parole violation. Miss Monette had been doing a lot of thinking in the past few days. Sure, they lost their savings, but they were still getting married. And they'd find a way to get their families there. And they'd still get that house one day. Who said they couldn't? And you know something else? Miss Monette absolutely loved solving the mystery. And that was still something to be proud of, right? For unearthing one more answer from the greedy world. Maybe she could find some more mysteries to solve in her free time. Maybe some other local legends and odd happenings. Preferably with less danger this time, but even she knew that might be a bit of a stretch in Wexler. As for the money, well, there was a knock at Monette's apartment door. Worried, but also curious, she got up and looked through the peephole. No one. Just dim pre-dawn. She slowly opened the door. There was a box at her feet. No name, no writing, no postage, nothing. The morning breeze had a scent of something truly sweet on it. Like a flower she didn't know the name of. Miss you so much it hurts, she thought as she opened the box. Then her jaw dropped. It was full of cash. Stunned, she pulled out an unsealed envelope and read it. Monette, I got your address from your cousin, Melvin. Wasn't too happy about him being a part of your little scheme, but it gets real hot over here at the Junkyard, as you can probably remember. And I like the way Melvin delivers the water. Has a real gift for it. Miss Monette let out a bewildered chuckle and continued reading. Anyway, long story short, I just didn't feel right about keeping the money. It was on my property, yeah, but it still belonged to that nice lady. I actually met her once. She organized a food bank not too far from the house out in the country, which really helped me and the kids out when we were struggling. Anyway, I decided to give the money back. I went up to the Foxhall house in the city. I didn't even know she passed away, honest. Shows you how much I keep up with the news. I met with one of the lawyers for the family's estate up there, and get this. They told me that Miss Elena's will said that if any of the money ever did turn up, that it was to be given to whoever turned it in. Imagine that, huh? I thought about saying no anyhow, but there's a whole lot more catfish breakfast I want to have. Anyway, Melvin told me you two were getting married, so here's your share. After all, if you wouldn't have figured out where it was before that lunatic came back, we'd all be broke, busted, and disgusted. Best wishes, Big Ed. As if this wasn't enough, the phone rang. Gilly was unfazed by this, still snoozing, so Miss Monette grabbed the box, came inside, and dumped the hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash playfully onto her snoozing husband-to-be. What a thing to wake up to whenever that might be, huh? And then she ran to the ringing telephone, the morning breeze still wafting through the open door. It was Miss Sally Washington on the other end, her wedding planner. She was asking if Miss Monette had finally decided on what flower she wanted for the wedding. There it was again. That sweet smell. Miss Sally, can I get right back to you on that? Said Miss Monette. And Monette Bridgeforth hung up the phone and followed the sweet scent of that unnamed flower right out the door, wherever it might lead. And she knew what she'd call them too, whether she'd find them on this side of heaven or the other. Valencia's. I'd like to sincerely thank you all again for taking the time to listen to this episode of Several Stories High. I'm so excited to have brought Miss Monette into my eclectic world of assorted tales and stories, and I'm really looking forward to exploring more mysteries with her and Gilly in future episodes. If you want to check out more stories, listen to original music from the show, or even find out more about my full-length novels, feel free to visit severalstorieshigh.com. And until next time, thank you for listening.